Hello and welcome once again to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and review the events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back.
Hello, Chris. Great to be back.
Yes. We didn't do a show last week because you had an awesome vacation. So
That's right. I was doing a little traveling, and we tried to do something from a hotel room, and it just wasn't happening. The technology was not there. So
yeah, no worries. But we got some fun stuff this week, so let's get into it. First off, and this was one that is such an interesting story. This guy Aaron Kyro, he's a Scientology staff member. You know, we can get into the details, but I just wanted to say I've always been kind of fascinated by this guy and what he does. What was the story this week?
yeah, I don't know how long ago he got on my radar, but I just got very interested in him because he leads such an amazing double life. On the one hand, he's been a staffer. He signed his first Scientology staff contract in 2004. So he's a 20-year veteran. We know that because at one point, Aaron kind of gave a little biographical talk about himself at the Hollywood Celebrity Center, and one of my readers was there and took detailed notes. So we kind of know a lot about this guy. I think he was originally from Montana, ended up in San Francisco, and somehow got sucked into Scientology. He was saying that he was impressed by how the OCA pegged him, the personality test pegged him as so miserable, and it was right. And that he was really impressed by things like word clearing. He didn't understand why there had not been an emphasis on that in school. And then he was blown away by History of Man, which is kind of sad. I mean, because this is the most ludicrous book L. Ron Hubbard ever published. But I guess for some people, it's just sort of fun to think of the galaxy being so wild and crazy. So for whatever reason, he got in pretty deep. But on the other hand, Chris, he leads this completely different life where he's the proprietor of this YouTube empire with nearly 6 million members, so subscribers, all about skateboarding. And his angle is he wanted to create a space for beginner skateboarders to be able to learn beginning tricks and ask questions without feeling like they were being looked down on. Because, you know, I'm sure skateboarding, like a lot of other communities, can be really tough on beginners and that kind of thing. Yeah. And he wanted this to be a very open thing where you could, they would do fun videos where they would go down and buy the cheapest skateboard at Walmart to see what they could do with it, and these are professional skateboarders. So, he grew a gigantic following. It's been going for more than 10 years. And that's how he's been able to donate so much money to Scientology, because, as a staffer, he was getting paid nothing.
Oh, nothing at all.
Right. I found that he was actually featured with a photograph in Impact Magazine in 2019 for reaching Silver Meritorious with Honors, which is $750,000. Subsequent to that, he was also listed as Gold Meritorious, which means he did up that to $1 million. So he's $1 million donor, 20-year staff veteran, and yet he runs this very busy business with these professional skateboarders, and they had this sort of headquarters. They had rented this warehouse for a decade, built all these ramps and stuff in it. They'd film videos in there. It was like known as this magnet, And just real quick, they call themselves Braille Skateboarding. It's kind of a joke on being, stumbling blind. I think it's a name in poor taste. I actually had a cousin who ran one of the Braille Institute in Southern California, and I have great respect for the Braille writing, system for the visually impaired. I don't think it's a funny joke to call it Braille skateboarding, but for whatever, I think in general, Aaron Kyro's Braille skateboarding is a very welcoming, inclusive, fun thing that he's done on YouTube that's made him a ton of money. But the question is always, how can he possibly do both of these things at the same time? Because they both, on their face, appear to be beyond full time. Well, apparently juggling those balls is becoming a problem for him. I started hearing, because people had known that I'd written a couple things about him in the past. People reached out to me They said, listen, you should check in on Aaron Kyro again because things are really going strange. On July 5th, without telling anybody, he had suddenly cleared out that warehouse and given the keys back to the owner of the building. And this shocked the fans because, again, this was like their headquarters, they had filmed so many videos there, and he just hadn't said anything to anybody. And then a couple of his skateboarder employees started putting out their own videos saying, I'm just trying to find out what's going on. And now Aaron's blocked me on social media. So there were a lot of questions about whether this had to do with anything with Scientology. And then this week, Aaron Kyro made a video to explain what was going on. 19 minutes. And he just explained it as a business situation where it was very interesting, Chris. And you do much more on YouTube. I do a little bit. But he described a situation. Okay, so clearly he was part of the YouTube gold rush, right?
Yep.
And making a lot of money, millions of subscribers. But then he said what TikTok did is change the game because TikTok made got so much volume, even though the videos were only like 20 or 30 seconds long, that they ended up with more viewing hours than YouTube. YouTube reacted they started focusing on short videos too.
Yep.
And okay, who cares? Who cares, right? Except that Kyro was explaining that for Braille skateboarding, their bread and butter were these hour-long, long-form videos. And he said the revenue on those started going down. Now, I don't do YouTube very much. I do a little bit. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was his explanation for why they got down to $14,000 a month, and that was not enough to cover the rent on the warehouse and pay his skateboard employees. Something had to give. I thought it was remarkable. He's actually mentioning real numbers and stuff. I mean, he appeared to be leveling with his followers, right?
Yeah.
And so he just said, look, not only did we not have the money anymore, but we weren't filming very many videos at the warehouse anymore anyway. And we just, and so at some point, some attorneys came to him and said, if you are not out of that warehouse by July 5th, you're on the hook for rent through 2026. And so then it was just like, okay, I had no choice. Now, in the video, he titles it as an apology, and he said, look, here's where I made my mistake. I made the mistake. I had to get out, but I made the mistake in not telling people, not giving our skateboarders one last day to do tricks in the warehouse and, have some big, event or something. I panicked, cleaned it out. I apologize for not telling anybody. And that's basically what his video was saying, that it was basically a market change, a business owner having to make a tough decision and apologizing for not keeping people in the loop. But there's two things about it, Chris, that I thought were worth mentioning for our purposes. One, he spent 19 minutes talking about all these complex things and never used a single Scientology phrase. And I wanted to ask you, for a 20-year staffer, wouldn't that take pretty incredible discipline?
Yes, very. He really has the separation of church and business, you could say, in his head. And it's rare because often it slips. People have actually asked me, how can you tell when you're talking to a Scientologist? And I said there are certain words, certain phrases, and the fact that they won't stop looking at you in the eye. But yeah. He seems to have mastered that.
He used the word communication at one point, but he uses it the way I would use it, not the way necessarily the way a Scientologist. Anyway, so that struck me. That I think he knew that people were looking to see this in the light of Scientology, and so he was very careful not to use a single Scientology word or phrase.
Right.
Then the other thing was the reaction. The fans and employees were not buying it. They were saying things like, some of the most beloved people in this community are trying to get answers from you, and you're disconnecting from them, like in the Scientology way. Wouldn't you like that $1 million back now? Things like that. So I don't think we're going to get much more from him about those kind of things. The point I wanted to make was, especially after watching that video, I can't help liking Aaron Kyro. I think this guy is a talented, smart, compassionate person. And for me, Chris, the real mystery is, how did Scientology get its hooks in so deep on a guy like this.
Yeah.
It's such a shame.
I agree completely. He's a very dynamic man. There's no way he's running that life and has been for the last 20 years, and he's not. This is a guy who is sharp, and he's got two very different worlds that he's running, and he has successfully maintained that channel all these years up until now. That ain't easy to do. We're talking about, changing markets and all that, but he's absolutely right about the shift, the seismic cultural shift in YouTube. Everybody's feeling it, and writing's on the wall in some ways. And I'm not going to get into my whole YouTube thing right now, but things are a changing. So, and all creators across the boards, from small to big, have been feeling that. Yeah. And I can say that, this is an example. We see so many egregious, abusive, horrible stories coming out of Scientology. But it really does run on the hard work, the sweat, the toil of well-intentioned people. And I can't think of a better example of that than Aaron Kyro. So
yeah, I mean, I just I'm amazed that a guy like that is pumping $1 million into Scientology when he's got such a great thing going.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see. He said, look, just because we're lost a warehouse doesn't mean the channel's over. He's got all kinds of new ideas and blah blah. I'll check in on it again later. I haven't really been looking at it, but fascinating guy, and it's just a shame that he can't see how extortionate Scientology is.
Something just came to my mind because I've been struggling to remember this man, because I was in San Francisco while he's been on staff there a couple times, and I don't remember running into him, but it suddenly dawned on me just now. The skateboard guy. They were trying to recruit him for the Sea Org. I remember hitting Sea Org guys going, and I believe we were hands off because he was being recruited by higher level recruiters and he was a big name because he had this big company. I'm thinking I'm remembering that right, because he had such an unusual name. It always stuck with me. Anyway, I'll just throw that in there. Okay. Moving along, you had a very interesting story about tax exemption, Scientology, and the Netherlands. What do we got here?
Yeah, so David Miscavige, his big claim to fame is that he got tax exempt status for Scientology in the United States in 1993. Well, 30 years later, he finally got it in the Netherlands. And what was interesting there was, like in the United States, the highest court had ruled you don't have to, to the IRS, you don't have to give them tax exempt status because it's a business and they're making money. And so the IRS in the United States had that backup from the Supreme Court, but they caved anyway. And in the Netherlands, it looked like the same thing happened. The Dutch IRS, the Dutch version of the IRS, even though they had that highest court ruling, after a 9-year appeal, finally a couple years ago said, okay, Dave, you win. And we were all thinking, gosh, this is just like the US. I can't believe this is happening. However, I have a reader that's there and sends me stuff every once in a while from the Netherlands. And recently he told me that somebody had made a records request with the Dutch IRS, and the Dutch IRS was by law required to put out this packet of information that met the request. Now, we both believe that it was the Church of Scientology itself that made the request, but we don't know for sure. But it's there. You can grab it, and it's a pretty good record of what's been going on between Scientology and the Dutch IRS the last few years. And what it shows is that, yeah, they gave the Church of Scientology tax exempt status, but then when it came time for Scientologists to actually submit receipts and say, okay, I shouldn't pay taxes on that, they're denying 95% of those requests. 95%. They are allowing donations to the Amsterdam Ideal Org. That is just a donation to a church supposedly upgrading its facilities, whatever. You're giving them money. You're not expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
The Dutch IRS has agreed that is tax exempt. That's tax. You can write that off in your taxes. But as far as auditing courses, when people are submitting those in their taxes and saying they shouldn't pay taxes on it, the Dutch IRS is saying, well, you're calling it a donation, but you're getting something in return, so it's not a donation, therefore it's not tax exempt. Now you have to understand, Chris, this is what, the whole crux of the matter was in the US 30 years ago. And the US Supreme Court had decided, yes, I don't care if it says donation, if you're paying $1,200 for an intensive of auditing, you're paying for a product. That's not a donation. So, but again, the U.S. caved on that. But the Dutch IRS, it turns out, according to these papers that we saw, is holding firm and is denying 95% of the things that Dutch Scientologists are submitting as tax exempt. So it looks like the Church of Scientology is going to sue all over again, and they have to go through a whole new set of legal battles there. But I just thought that was interesting because basically the Dutch IRS is holding the line that the U.S. IRS just couldn't maintain, even with U.S. Supreme Court backing.
How fascinating, and what interesting details, because I wasn't actually aware of that with the Supreme Court ruling over here. I thought we were just frustrated by First Amendment issues and all the rest. But
it's the Hernandez rule. It's the Hernandez ruling, and the U.S. Supreme Court found it was actually it's a long background involving a Jewish couple that wanted anyway. The point is, the U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled that the Church of Scientology, was a business operating, and you got something for. And so when the IRS in the United States caved, they caved even though they had the U.S. Supreme Court on their side. So it's just incredible.
Yeah, no, and it's a reflection of, one, the weakness of the IRS commissioner, I'll say it out loud, but two, the incredible and unprecedented pressure that was being brought on the IRS by the church for years, not weeks or a months-long media campaign. They kept going because Scientology knew if they had to pay that tax bill and they were not going to get their exemption back, it was game over. So they threw everything at it. Everything. You've never seen Scientology fight harder for anything than that tax exemption in '93. That I can guarantee you. But how interesting that Netherlands is like, so I love it. I just think that's awesome because that's the kind of European attitude that just keeps coming through that the U.S. just will not seem to get with our IRS. Okay, now we have an update on the Whitney Mills lawsuit. What happened this last week?
So Whitney Mills is the OT8 young woman that was so depressed and who took her life in a really violent way when her fellow Scientologists were telling her to drop the body. That they couldn't imagine her going to a psychiatrist and just getting some basic mental health care. So they told her to drop this lifetime and start a new one, and she did. So her mother, Layla Mills, who was never a Scientologist, is suing 6 Scientology defendants, entities, businesses, for wrongful death. And that was filed in early June. And so I'm just waiting to see what those 6 defendants say. The 6 defendants, real quick: Flag Service Organization, which runs a flag land base; Flagship Service Organization, which runs the Free Winds; the Tampa Org, the Bel Air Mission, the Church of Scientology International, and the IASA, which is the basically the business arm of the IAS. So those are the 6 Scientology entities that she's suing, but she's not suing David Miscavige, which is interesting. So I was curious to see how that might affect the Scientology attorney's responses, because
right.
we're always curious to see how Scientology responds to lawsuits, because they write these briefs that are just so over the top, angry and sneering, and just there's all this bluster because they're writing for Dave. They're not necessarily writing for the court. Well, this was a very different tone in what these attorneys submitted this week in court in Florida and said, listen, Judge, we're really not trying to delay things here. We're really not trying to mess with anything, but she's about to sue Dr. Minkoff, the quack Scientology doctor, and we want to see those claims before we answer the lawsuit. I mean, just almost hat in hand, polite. The 2 points they wanted to make. First was that yes, she's going to David Minkoff, the quack Scientology doctor that lost his license for a year when he for prescribing sedatives to Lisa McPherson without actually seeing her, and he's still a quack. He diagnosed Whitney Mills with things she didn't have. He told her she had cancer, she didn't. He told her to handle her mental problems with training routines and Tone 40, all spelled out in text messages. It's going to be ugly. So, but by Florida statute, Layla Mills gave him a warning back in, I guess, May, but she can't file a lawsuit until a 90-day period goes by. That 90-day period ends next week. So she may add to the current lawsuit. She may file a separate lawsuit. But Scientology was telling the court, listen, we really don't want to say anything yet until we see what she's got in that lawsuit. That's the one thing. The other thing that's interesting is they claim they've gone back and researched things, and now they've learned new information, and they're trying to get together with Layla Mills' attorney, this attorney in Miami, and because when we sit down together, they're going to drop the lawsuit, right? Which I thought was really interesting. The way they're sounding very sure of themselves that basically these folks just don't understand what really happened, and once we show them what really happened, they won't sue us. I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to say. I mean, did they dig up some dirt on Whitney and they're going to let her mother know you're not going to want to let this come out? Or do they really think that they've found some stuff that exonerates the Church of Scientology in the whole thing? I don't know. But they want a little time to meet with the attorney on the other side and to try to talk them out of lawsuits. So that's the latest. I assume they're going to get that delay, but that just makes me more interested in what kinds of claims we're going to see against Dr. Minkoff in the next week or two.
I will just remind everybody right now that no matter how bad you think Scientology is, let's remember, it's always worse.
Well, and look, a lot of times Scientology is a very secretive organization, and sometimes we're telling people about terrible things they did to people in the 80s and the 90s, or Paulette Cooper in the 70s, and there's always the feeling, yeah, but what are they doing today? Are they really harming anybody? And then this comes out, and this is just 2 years ago, and the horrible things they did to this poor woman.
Yeah.
It's Lisa McPherson all over again. It's just horrendous. Right. Allegations. We'll see what comes out in court. But yeah, you're right, Chris. I mean, it just reminds us that things don't change, They
don't. And I was thinking about what they're going to come into that meeting with, if they're going to meet with her, with Whitney's mom, if she grants them that. I think they're going to, it's not going to be an either or it's, they're going to bring everything bad that you could possibly imagine they would do. They'll do it. And then some stuff we haven't even thought of.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just kind of classically what they do. So it's kind of easy to predict. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'll just put it out there. And there's a chance, though, that if they settle or it stops in its tracks at that point, we may never know anything about what happens at the meeting.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And let's keep in mind, Layla Mills is not a Scientologist, not an ex-Scientologist. She's obviously very distraught about what happened to her daughter, but that doesn't mean that she necessarily wants to get into some big public fight over Scientology. And if Scientology offers her a settlement that'll avoid a public trial and she takes it, I'm not going to blame her. I don't know her. I don't know, that's, people are quick to judge and say, oh, you should take him to court and get, make Scientology divulge things. It's tough to be in that position. I'm sure she's very upset about what happened to her daughter. And if Scientology just comes in with a check and it goes away, we may not get to learn very much at all.
That's right. The other thing, of course, is they're going to use any meeting like that, if it doesn't settle, for information gathering purposes, so that they can tailor make a fair game campaign against her. Because that will be step 2 if this doesn't fly, and that's why you really gotta temper those judgments out there, because there is very little that you can experience in this world as horrifying and upending to your life as suing Scientology. And it's a years-long process.
Yeah.
And I've talked to the people who've done it. I'm telling you, it is an ordeal. And and getting out of that, it's completely understandable to me. All right. Now, you mentioned we name dropped Paulette Cooper. It was a special event this week. What was this?
Yeah, every July 26th, I just drop everything else and just salute Paulette. I mean, she's the reason I decided to write a book about Scientology, and then I needed a website to kind of support the book. And here all these years later, still am. And I find her such an amazing person. She's written her own memoir now, and for her birthday, she put out a chapter of it at Alex's website. So, I mean, she's not stopping. She's still, she's still working away, and I just think she's delightful.
Awesome. Just awesome. Go Paulette. And then finally, talking about the bottom of the bottom with Scientology, this was an interesting, insightful story this week into, again, how Scientology, all the way up to right now, is not a really great organization. This had to do with trafficking of kids. What was the story here?
Yeah. Well, we've once Dave finally got a chance to open up these ideal orgs that were delayed for so long, he made a big show of opening 4 real quick in succession in Austin, Chicago, Mexico City, and Paris. And then, of course, naturally, we're wondering, okay, so what's next? Because we know that they've got these fundraising efforts going all over the place. But which one is actually going to be next? And so I've started to get some fundraising mailers sent to me that suggest, a number of them are kicking into higher gear on the fundraising, but Puerto Rico actually says it's under construction. And they think they're going to be next. And one sign that they might be getting close is that they're now doing their central files thing. And this is something that's hard to understand if you're not in Scientology, but Scientology does use computers, but there's this sacrament of the paper file dossier.
That's a good word
on
for
everybody.
It's a sacrament.
Multiple folders. And if you've just bought a book or you just took a single course 20 years ago, you will be in the central files of that org that you were associated with. And they are obsessed with keeping those central files up to date and alphabetized. And so if they're going to open a new ideal org, apparently they make a big deal of an overhaul of the central files. And this just takes, we've seen photos from some of the previous ones, just rooms filled with these folders that have to be gone through and reorganized and re-alphabetized. It's just busy work, day and night. Well, one of these fundraising mailers that got forwarded to me talked about high school kids from Scientology high schools in Clearwater getting flown to Puerto Rico to do that work. And hey, can you chip in? If you give us $20, we can feed a kid for a day. If you give us $40, we can put them up for a week, whatever. I don't know what it was. But and they have these pictures of these kids having some fun, And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You're talking about moving minors across state lines so they can do intense labor day and night for a church? Yep. Chris, there's a word for that. It popped into my head. Trafficking.
Exactly. I kind of studied this. Yeah, exactly. This is the Church of Scientology, labor trafficking right there while the human trafficking case in Florida is happening. You just can't make this stuff up. And you are absolutely right. That is what they are doing. and have been doing, by the way, for a very long time. I mean, in the 1990s, when the pack-based Big Blue buildings were all getting renovated, they shipped in all the Delphi kids to do days and days of Central Files work. The only thing that people were lamenting is the kids could only be there for 6 or 7 hours a day. So, we got to get all the rest of the crew in there. Yeah, I mean, they don't even, I was saying earlier, they don't even have the concept of trafficking in that organization. People just do this and they pat each other on the back for their ingenuity and smart thinking. Yeah, let's get the kids in here. They'll have fun. It'll be great. We'll buy them pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite comments at the site was somebody was imagining talking to one of these kids after they came back from all their work in Central Files and in Puerto Rico, and said, "Oh, you're in Puerto Rico? Yeah. How was the beach?" And the kid saying, "There was a beach?"
Yeah, exactly. Having been to Hawaii 3 times before I ever set foot on the beach, because I was a Scientology Sea Org member, right? Yeah, that is what it's like.
Wow.
Serious. First 3 times I went to Hawaii, I never saw the beach. So yeah, human trafficking alive and well, actually, really for real. So that's our science.
Well, I just put it out there that maybe there's some law enforcement person somewhere that might be interested in go down there and knock on the door and say, okay, who are these kids? Why are they here? And maybe there's a case to be made. The other thing, Bruce Hines pointed this out to me. It doesn't say much for their personnel or their manpower in Puerto Rico. You're building an ideal org supposedly because there's this great demand for Scientology, but then you don't have enough people to do your own Central Files there. You got to fly kids in from Florida.
Exactly. There's this hidden thing in Scientology everywhere, which is piles and piles and piles of unfiled papers. I mean, it's like they said, it's the sacrament to have all these paper hard copy things. This has been this way because Scientology is anachronistic. And so they just won't give up these old systems. The other thing I had a question about on this was, weren't they doing GoFundMe's as part of this? Did I see that wrong?
I don't.
I mean, getting the donations for those kids, because I was thinking to myself, I wonder if the GoFundMe organization understands this is, or if that could be reported as well as another avenue.
I just think you go to their normal Go Ideal website.
Oh, got it. Okay, then I saw that wrong.
That's probably what you saw was Go Ideal.
Go Ideal. Got it. Well, okay, good. We got that cleared up. So thank you, Tony, as always. Any kind of concept of what we got coming up this week now that you're back?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I've got some cool stuff I'm working on, but I should keep my mouth shut until I get it put together.
Fair enough. Okay, guys. Well, keep up. Tony's address for the Substack is right there on the screen in front of you. Subscribe, get your daily notifications, and of course, check back in with us each week for the weekly summaries and commentary. It's always entertaining. All right, folks. See you next week. Bye-bye.